Here we go again. Hello, everybody. Good evening. I don't talk about inflation very much because I think I assume that most people know all about it and basic economic principles. Plus, it's kind of a boring thing to talk about. But I think I assume a lot, and some people might want to. Now that we're kind of in the middle of inflation, and prices are really now we've been in the middle of it for 100 years, but I mean we're in the middle of finally the end result of it really catching up in the United States dollar. It's a good idea to touch up on some basics. It's not so bad that you might know what I'm talking about, but most people literally have no idea why prices are going up. It's interesting because I think in the United States people are a bit more educated because even on the news they're talking about inflation. Here in Ecuador, they're barely talking about inflation, or at least not from a money supply perspective. They're more talking about it as it's the politician's fault perspective. So what we'll see here, for example, there's a group of indigenous leaders who people might assume actually kind of represent the indigenous people. Really, it's a bunch of indigenous people who have been bought and paid for by the WEF, Soros, IMF crowd. They call them, they have this nickname in their language, like golden ponchos, for the political elite of the indigenous. And they're basically like the Bernie Sanders, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez of Ecuador, supporting all these ridiculous, impossible policies. So just recently they're threatening a national strike in Ecuador, and their list of demands include such things as lowering the price of gasoline from whatever, $2.55 down to $1.50, and a praise on the ignorance of uneducated people that live in rural areas who really don't understand that the only way to get gas down is for the government to pay for it, The government still subsidizes it a little bit, not as much as it used to. They never should have started the gas subsidy in the first place. Plenty of other extremely poor Latin American countries do not have any gasoline subsidies, never did, and are perfectly fine, right? Ecuador, on the other hand, has had it since I think the 70s or 80s, and back when they started it, it was warned against as a policy. They're like, oh, this is going to get us somewhere bad. People are going to expect it. And yeah, sure enough, people are expecting it. So they gradually eased off of it, and now people are demanding that it be brought back, the less educated people. Because prices are rising. What are we going to do about it? The government has to do something. Well, okay, so the only thing they can do is pay for your gas. So if they add more subsidy back, and that means they're paying for $1.05 additional of every single gallon of gas that every single person in the whole country purchases. So they were spending billions of dollars on these subsidies back when they had them even stronger. They still are, but much less now. So they're going to have to do that again. But also on this list of demands is not stop accepting loans from the IMF and China. So obviously you can see how that's impossible. How can the government fork out billions of dollars more each year to pay for everyone's gas because the gas prices are too high? Yet they can't take out loans to pay for it. But they don't have the income, obviously, to do this. But then people say, oh, well, the politicians are just stealing all the money. Sure, politicians steal money, but the amount they steal is nothing in comparison to the total government budget. It would not even put the dent in these, the amount that's wasted on corruption wouldn't even put a dent in the massive amounts of money that would have been spent on these subsidies. But it gets worse. If that's bad enough, they turned asking the impossible into asking the truly impossible by also including in their list of demands immediately prohibit all mining activities. So all these multi-million-dollar mining operations across the country, who often are foreign companies, sometimes they're Ecuadorian companies, are immediately supposed to stop operations. First of all, they would lay off thousands of workers. I don't think these people realize that would be terrible. Second of all, the government makes a huge amount of revenue from this. So not only should the government fork out billions of more dollars, they also have to not take any more loans and cut off a huge amount of their revenue, which is basically concessions from and various deals from mineral extraction operations. And yeah, I know that mining is very bad for the ecology, the environment. But yeah, obviously, hopefully they're doing it in a limited fashion. They're not mining quite as much as they are in some other countries. I know it's an issue. It's definitely an environmental issue. But you have to understand the impossibility of immediately ceasing all mining operations in the country. That would be absolutely insane. And that's what this list of demands says. It's crazy how people are even supporting this. They're barely even reading it. They're just reading it like, yeah, it's a great idea. I want to pay less. And they see food prices going up here. And they don't realize that it's not necessarily the value of the food going up. It's the value of the dollar going down. And I know that seems like one and the same thing, but it's like looking at the cause of it, right? The cause of it is not that greedy suppliers and farmers decide to charge more and your local neighborhood mom and pop shop randomly jacks the price up. right? Dollars are worth less. They're buying less. Every dollar buys less than it used to, and that's been going on for the entire history of all fiat currencies, ever, right? For the entire history of mankind, it's been like that. But government, so why don't people learn by now? Because governments don't teach that. They teach you about the Holocaust over and over and over and over and over again in American public schools every single year. Every single year we learned about Holocaust and Civil War, American Civil War and Holocaust. Why did they teach about, I learned about those two things more than anything else in history class. Extreme detail about the American Civil War. They wanted to teach us a lesson about how states should never secede. They want to drive that into every child's head. Don't even think about a state seceding from the United States. Totally unthinkable. Look how horrible it was. Teach you about it every single year. I don't know what lesson they're trying to teach by teaching about the Holocaust every single year, or maybe it's things I just can't say on my YouTube channel. Anyways, those two things we just learned about over and over again, but we know we never learned about the history of fiat currency, inflation. They touched on it a tiny, tiny bit. So obviously for thousands of years, since the days of the Roman Empire, government schools have not wanted children, and of course private schools that are generally run in the curriculums written by people who are educated in public schools or have some kind of vested interest in keeping people sheep. So whether it's a public school or a private school, 99% of them are not teaching you valuable economic information. So for thousands of years, nobody really knows what's going on aside from the few of us who actually take the time to research it and learn about it and realize that, hey, actually inflation is literally politicians printing money, kind of invisibly stealing, printing money, right, and invisibly stealing value from us, right? Some of you might not understand exactly how that works. It's really hard. There are some cute little fables and examples that explain it perfectly. I don't remember them right now. But the one thing I think it's hard for people to understand is why, for example, prices rise. Why can't the government do something about it? And that's more of an Ecuador issue in the United States. I don't think people are necessarily abruptly calling for price controls right now in the U.S. because I think some people, inflation's all in the back of their mind. They realize, hey, money's being printed, Basically, why does money being printed cause prices to rise? Somebody asked me that today because I was talking with some of the guys who work here, the Ecuadorian guys, who don't really know about any of this stuff. They just know prices are going up and they want the government to do something about it. I'm like, well, what can the government do about it? All right. So you can look at it from two angles. Why are they rising, really? And also, what can the government do about it? Well, what can the government do about it? They could put more subsidies. But wait, how are they going to pay for the subsidy if they don't have any money to begin with? And the subsidies will only continue to get more expensive as prices continue to rise. So the government will only have to do more mining, more loans from Chinese and the IMF. And the more money the government gets, of course, there's going to be more corruption and graft from it. It doesn't seem like a sustainable solution. The other option is to put price controls. Like put laws. A lot of people here in Ecuador seem to support the government making laws establishing a set price for rice, bread, milk, and other staples, right? And I told one of those people today, I was like, you're a cow farmer, right? And you have cows and you sell milk, right, to a distributor or whatever. And say it costs you, I'm just making up numbers here. You have to pay, obviously, for the cows. You have to amortize the cost of your land, the cost of your farmhands, your employees that you're paying, all the materials, the vaccinations for the cows and all, whatever. All this operating costs you have to pay constantly. So let's say it costs you like, say a real bad economy right now, and it costs you $2.50 a gallon to produce the milk, and you sell it for $2.50 a gallon to your distributor. I'm making up numbers right now. You sell it for $2.50 a gallon to your distributor, right? And prices keep going up year after year. Like your costs, the things you're paying for, are constantly going up, and your cost of production goes up to $2.20, $2.25, $2.30. All of a sudden, you're like, I can't make a living on this. I'm gonna have to shut my farm down if I don't raise prices. So now you're like, hey, distributor, you got to pay me $2.60. You got to pay me $2.70. Now it's up to $3. Inflation is skyrocketing. Government comes along, price cap. We're sorry, sir. Due to speculation and price gouging, and to protect the consumer, we're implementing a price cap on basic necessities. You cannot sell milk for more than $2.55 a gallon, or you will go to jail and be fined, and your farm will be shut down, right? So here you are. It costs you $2.80 a gallon to produce milk. What do? You shut down, or you risk getting arrested. So that causes shortages, and that's why people die of famines when government tries to control the economy and put price caps. Really, all that happens is producers stop producing. Because why? Why would you produce? You don't even have the money. You'd be paying huge amounts of money for everyone else to consume your product. You wouldn't be making anything on it. It would be literally impossible to do. People don't realize the hard truth of that. So you shut down, and there's shortages. But there's always some massive companies. This is also a great way for the government to shut out all the tiny producers, and only massive companies can afford to do that. Maybe the massive company has all their cows in the CAFO, and they put all these chemicals in the milk, and their cost of production is still only $2.40. So they can still barely afford to sell at a razor-thin profit margin at $2.55 a gallon. And, they can, selling millions of gallons, they can afford, to make it work, in like the Walmart model. So maybe they come along and buy you up. They offer you 50 cents on the dollar for your farm, your business, your entire operation, and you're just like, hey, this is all I can do right now, I'm going to do it. And next thing you know, everything is owned by massive businesses. Everyone is more poor than they were before because of the government price caps, ironically trying to protect the consumer. So price caps don't work. In Venezuela, they capped the price of bread, and they were actually throwing bread store owners in jail for selling it above that price. But the currency was hyperinflating. They were paying more than the cost of bread to get the bread, so how could they sell it at that price? Anyone who thinks price caps is a good reason is stupid. But I understand they're manipulated by these governments, and they don't really think about it. It's like, yeah, government needs to do something. Prices are going up. So why are the prices going up? So the dollar is not scarce. They're printing huge amounts of it out of thin air constantly. Many people don't know this, but they greatly increased dollar printing in the last few years, supposedly as a response to the whole COOF thing. So, they just use that COOF thing as an excuse for everything. But they printed 80% of all the US dollars in existence were printed out of thin air in just the last 2 or 3 years. 80% of all US dollars. That's how much money supply inflation, which is inflation, right? Price inflation is just prices rising in response to money supply inflation, right? So when someone says inflation, right? Money supply inflation, that's what it is. It just doesn't happen right away. They print many dollars, fiat currency, euros, whatever, yuan for many years. And eventually it always has a gradual effect on consumer prices constantly rising gradually, and the stock market rising also because of that. But eventually it catches up and they start printing an insane amount because they're addicts, and the money supply shoots up, and then prices gradually and then suddenly shoot up. And then you have Weimar Republic / Zimbabwe / Venezuela types of events. All right? So that's inflation 101 for y'all. It happens gradually and then suddenly. So yeah, obviously, why is there being more dollars? Someone also asked me today, why are there being more dollars? Why does that make it go down in value? And it's like, well, look at the rock next to you on the ground. Why is it not worth anything? Because there's rocks everywhere. It's not scarce, right? When something is not scarce, it's not really worth much. Obviously, it's relative to the demand, supply and demand, all right? So there's generally been an amount of demand for US dollars and a certain supply amount that's being printed and the amount already in circulation. What they're doing is jacking up the supply to ridiculous levels that eventually it's outpacing the demand. And that's what happens. So there's too many dollars chasing too few goods and services. The number of goods and services generally staying the same. It's increasing gradually as the population increases, but it's not shooting up. We didn't create 80% of all the goods and services and the raw materials in the world and natural resources in the last 3 years, right? That's always been there. We didn't inflate those things. We only inflated the dollar. So we have tons and tons and tons of dollars. It doesn't matter how they're being distributed in the long run. Tons and tons of dollars flooding the market, chasing the same amount of goods and services, or even fewer goods and services. So that's what happens, quite simply. The price of everything goes up. Now, you might think to yourself, well, why does that, you're still asking, why does that actually make the price of everything go up, right? What is the mechanism? Well, we can look at some examples, not just simple supply and demand, bidding. Obviously with the stock market, it's just bidding. You have to bid higher to get the same stock. No one's going to sell it to you at a low price. If they know 10 people all wanted that price, they're going to raise the price. And someone's going to bid a little higher. And that's what the stock market is, except it's done by computers now. It's automated, right? But in terms of goods and services, let's look at something really simple, like you're a guy mowing lawns for a living, right? How would that affect you? How does more even not talking about inflation, what if it's just more demand for your business? Why does more, because in the end it's more dollars, whether it's the banks printing lots of the central bank printing lots of money, lending it to banks, tons of people having more money, government welfare, lots of people having extra money to spend in various distribution methods, whether it's bank loans or government welfare or more government jobs, and there's more money flowing into your business, or just, even if that's not happening, just a general increase in interest in your lawn mowing business in the area. Lots more people move into the area all of a sudden. So why could that cause your prices to rise? Can't you just keep mowing people's lawns for exactly the same price, right? You can, but then you'd never be able to increase the number of customers that you service. And say you provide a really good service, right? You could only mow 40 hours a week, but now you want to work overtime. You're gonna charge more for overtime because you're not stupid. Overtime, it reduces the quality of your life. Overtime also reduces, for example, the time you might spend to repair your own lawnmower, which you might do in the evenings or the mornings before you go to your normal shift, to your normal job, right? But now you don't have time for that because you're working overtime every day. And so you have to not only leave your lawnmower at a shop and pay more for a mechanic to do it, but also you might have to buy another lawnmower because you're using it now a lot more, 40 hours plus overtime. Maybe you're doing 2 or 3 hours of overtime every single day. And now your lawnmower is going to break a little more often, and you can't afford the downtime because you have tons of customers coming at you all the time. So you need to buy another lawnmower. So now that money that you pay for getting that extra lawnmower needs to be amortized over the next 5 years, or however you figure it. That cost needs to get passed on to your customers. Otherwise, you're donating money to them. Otherwise, you're losing money, On top of that, because of, again, back to this money supply increasing, prices increasing scenario, all the parts are increasing in price. The gasoline is increasing in price. Everything's increasing in price. So you have to pass those costs onto your customer. So not just everything you have to pay for as a producer is getting passed on to your customer, but also the cost of expanding your business due to increased customer needs to get passed on to your customer, because otherwise you can't expand your business at the level needed. Now, everyone should be making enough money in whatever they're doing if they're self-employed that they can always reinvest a little bit to expanding their business a little bit in a natural, organic way. But if they get tons of customers all of a sudden, they really need to push a bunch of money and hire another employee, sink a bunch of costs, buy another machine, do this, do that, rent another office space somewhere, if whatever you're doing, and you need a bunch of money up front for that. So you can get a bank loan, or you can also raise your prices. You're probably going to do both, because you know what? If you're such a successful business, people aren't going to go with that one dude down the street who's mowing lawns by himself still, because they're going to well, this guy who's got a business now, and he's got 3 employees and a bunch of lawnmowers sitting outside his house, he does a better job. He's professional. He never cancels because his lawnmower is broken, because he has 13 lawnmowers now. So I'm going to, even though the other guy charges $38 a day, and this guy charges $43 a day, I'm gonna get this guy instead because he's way better. So that's just using some guy mowing lawns for a living. That's an explanation of how just more dollars causes the cost, more dollars going into the market everywhere around you and just to your business causes not just your costs as a producer to rise that you have to pass on to your clients, but also the cost of necessarily having to expand your business to reach more, to service everyone who wants to buy your stuff. Or if you actually have a factory and you're producing stuff, you have to buy more 10,000. You've seen factory machines on Alibaba. Each machine to just do some simple task like taking the shells off cashews and then sorting the cashews and then sorting them again by size, or first deacidizing them and doing all this other stuff to them, and then finally at the end splitting them and then sorting them again and then washing them and then polishing them and then bagging them. Each machine in that process is a $10,000 to $15,000 machine, right? So imagine if you have a big factory and all of a sudden there's a lot more dollars flowing in trying to buy more stuff from you, and you have to buy all these more machines. You have to increase prices. That's just so. Those are a couple examples. I'm not saying that is the reason prices increase when there's more money flowing into businesses. Those are 2 examples of, in 2 specific types of businesses, the different ways in which all that new money flowing in, prices have to increase, because you just can't keep offering. You can't increase your volume and at the same price until, obviously there's an opposite force that I'm not mentioning. There's the opposite force in economies of scale. A massive factory can always produce things at a lower cost than a smaller factory. But I'm talking about once they're established, they've already sunk in that funding. A small factory that's trying to, or a small business or a small self-employed person trying to increase the size of their operation and needs to increase their prices and get that money in right away. And if the economy really is in a situation where there's tons of money floating around everywhere, it's not going to discriminate. It just needs goods and services. People will pay those high prices until the government comes along and institutes price caps at the behest of the people who don't really understand why the prices are rising, and they think price caps will actually do something. What do price caps actually do? As I explained before, they cause shortages. And shortages kill people, right? Shortages in medicine. You've all seen those FEMA or CDC or whatever studies. Those studies they do if there was ever an SHTF situation in just the United States, for example, and they estimate a huge percent, 50% of people would die within the first 3 months. And most of those is simply because of not having access to medication. A lot of people in the US, their life is dependent on a medication they're taking every day. And if they stop taking that medication, their health would quickly deteriorate and they would die. A lot of people are in that situation, right? So, and that's just medicine, right? Then in the long term, there's food. We all remember how many, now there's famines and mass genocides that they didn't teach us in the school because they were too busy teaching us every single year, an entire cycle about, an entire semester about American Civil War, Holocaust. American Civil War, Holocaust. Over and over again. They didn't teach us about all these other things that happened, most of which were mass starvations by communist dictators, right? And I remember I was talking about one of those things on Facebook, and this guy commented, well, I heard that such and such genocide was actually the fault of these people, like the fault of whoever it was, the Ukrainians, or is because they actually like just gave up all their food to the government instead of, well, no, like that's what it literally is. The government comes along and takes all your food. Like they come along to the grain farmers, sorry, you have to give us all your grain, you have to sell us all of it at the government approved price. The government keeps it in huge warehouses. People died outside of Mao Zedong's grain warehouses in China. They starved to death kneeling at the doors of his warehouses because just the way the bureaucracy that was arranged, not just did they want all those people to starve to death, but also the bureaucracy is arranged in such a way there was just no way to distribute it all. The government centralized it and controlled it, but then lacked the competency to actually get it out to people. Even if they had wanted to get it out to people, which I don't think they did, it was probably an intentional starvation. Most of those were. So I see many examples of this same thing happening, like economic woes, prices rising, people demand the politicians do something, and the politicians, of course, do, more economic control, price controls, printing more money, demonizing anyone who raises their prices, putting bread store owners in jail because they're selling bread for 20 cents a piece. The government maximum price is 10 cents a piece, but it costs them 50 cents a piece to make the bread. Things like that. And so the government does all those things, and then there's shortages, and people die. Millions and millions of people die, right? And the governments perpetuate that process because they never end up teaching the new people that are born after that why that happened. Oh, the basic economic principles of we print lots of money, you die. We print lots of money, you die. You're basically slaves for us, you work your whole lives. We're taxing you through taking your money that way, but also we're like in this really conniving, scheming way, like secretly taking away all the value of your money via inflation in a way that you don't even understand because we don't teach you it in school, really. So you spend your whole life doing this, slaving away to us, and then every few generations in some country, there's some massive genocide event, and you all die. So the end of the cycle is just we print money, you die, we print money, you die, we print money, you die. And we never teach you why you're dying, and you don't even listen to the people that are telling you that's happening, like people like me right now, right, ranting to people about it. Obviously, some people will listen to me, but other people will just be like, and keep on calling for the same things, saying they feel hopeless. Like, well, yeah, but it's really bad. Prices are really going up. The price, food prices increasing. Someone said that to me. Yeah, food prices. Well, yeah, food prices increasing. You know why? Because the United States Central Bank and all the other central banks are printing money out of control. The value of the dollar is going down, and that's and if you are taught maybe in school about basic economics, or if your parents taught you, if somebody knew and told you that and you didn't reject the information about gold, silver, hard assets, you can't say, oh, poor people don't have access, because like India, it's like the largest household owners of gold in the entire world, largest domestic gold ownership, right? And India is also one of the poorest countries. So tons and tons of poor people still own, each family owns just a little bit of gold, and that's often enough to get them through some tough times, some hyperinflation event, because everyone's seen for thousands of years how many times that happens, that cycle of we print money, you die, we print money, you die. It happens over and over again, right? How do you get the word out? Maybe you can't, I don't know. Just got to keep trying to tell people this is why it's happening. It's not, your politicians can't do anything about it. They caused the problem, and now the damage is already done. You can't fix it now. All that's going to happen is the currency's going to keep inflating. Everyone who has their savings in dollars are going to lose all their savings, and a lot of people are going to die. Whether it's localized over the entire world, like the Georgia Guidestone says, I don't know. But it's cyclical and it keeps happening. So the best thing you can do, have lots of kids and teach them what I'm saying right now, so they don't fall into the same trap, so they don't base their entire life on government fiat currency and the system. So they're a bit more resilient. So the we die thing maybe starts happening to less and less people. And maybe these global elites who have been ruling the world for thousands of years, passing their knowledge down from family to family, maybe they start feeling, wait a second, this has become less effective. Less and less people are dying each time we do this. More people are actually resilient to what we're doing. And there's so many people now we can barely contain them. And that's when they lose.